Right, we are recording. I'm going full screen. Right, cool, here we go. Welcome everyone to another Video Game Anatomies podcast. This is the 4th episode, and for the 4th episode, I've brought along 3 more of some lovely people here to chat to me with me about this episode, and I'm going to introduce them all. At the top of my screen, also sporting a very nice quality webcam, is Munashe, who will be talking about all the competitive stuff regarding this topic because he will be very experienced in that. That also will go for the guy at the bottom with the Buzz Lightyear emote, is Mr. Slowly, who is also very probably experienced in the competitive side of this topic. And then the guy with a Destiny profile down there, rest in peace Destiny, is Mr. Juan the Dealer, who is also going to chat about this topic and probably a little bit of a more different side of it, because I do think there's some interesting stuff to explore about all of this. But the topic in question is strafing, which has well, it's been in a very long cycle. It's been through a lot of evolutions. It's been through a lot of revolutions. And strafing itself is something that we see in all games. It's not as old, possibly, as a lot of topics we have discussed previously on these podcast episodes, but it's very, very internal to gameplay, especially just the movement of a character, which is almost as fundamental or basic as you can get. So you can imagine how much strafing has an effect in a lot of top aspects, which we'll be covering now. But yeah, we do especially obviously see it in one big genre, and then shooter genre is like completely full of strafing. Almost everywhere there's strafing in the shooter genre, and it's kind of a big definition about it, especially when you look into the more modern times with the multiplayer and stuff. But it's quite difficult to kind of really put all these different types and techniques of strafing into one box and say, this is like a proper definition of strafing. This is literally like, if it ticks all these boxes, then it's considered strafing. It's not really feasible these days to like be talking about like, oh, this is a method of strafing. So I'm gonna try my best to describe it based on what I've read and all that, and just to look at a bit more loose definitions that people give it. But it's basically just a specific movement into the opposing or lateral direction that interrupts the current moving momentum of the player. So in terms of what I'm saying, if you're going forward, you have forward momentum, you're suddenly changing direction, be it sideways, upwards, some sort of lateral movement, it's interrupting your momentum, and it's kind of doing this like, it's a quick strafe. And that's just to, with the whole point of that being to avoid enemy gunfire, an attack, something that's trying to gain you an advantage in some sort of way. It has a little bit of a muddled history in this mechanic. It's like hard really to pinpoint or put your finger down on like, this is where it's happened, this is where it started and stuff, because there's a lot of kind of debate about when you want to say this is when strafing starts, or when strafing first became possible. But I will say that some part of the evolution of games has made it more sense to be somewhere around there. That's happened. So late 80s and moving towards the 90s. Yeah? What now? Hello? I heard someone and disappeared. I'm not sure. Okay. In the late 80s and moving towards the 90s?
No, sorry, I was just talking to someone.
Oh, no worries. In the late 80s and moving towards the 90s, all games that we had available had one thing in common. It was two-dimensional. It was two-dimensional on the screen. It was two-dimensional in its gameplay, the way that the game was played, and your movement was two-dimensional. Now, you're removing an entire direction from the game. There's an entire vector not in the game, which, as you can think, it alters drastically what type of motion you have available to yourself, especially when you have to put it into a two-dimensional perspective. And I believe, like, if you think back about early shoot-em-ups, beat-em-ups, even recent games like the puzzle games like Limbo, Unravel, Inside, all those type of things, the way that the game is portrayed and the way that the perspective is made doesn't really make strafing possible. You had this kind of side scroller view that goes like this with the two-dimensional perspective, and at that point the movement was hindered in such a way that it only defines one specific direction you're going at one point. So At that point, strafing wasn't really possible or feasible to be considered into that type of things. And it's the limitation that obviously the 2 dimensions brings. But the 90s rolled on, and there was one developer actually in particular who was a really big catalyst for introducing this innovative and internal mechanic to games. I want you guys to just try and figure it out for you. I'm going to talk about it. The 90s were introducing shooters for the first time. In particular, it was introducing shooters from a first-person perspective and with 3D rendering. If you think about the games back in those days, what games comes to mind that did those type of things first?
In my head, probably say Counter-Strike.
Counter-Strike, it's a little late, but it was one of the ones that kind of started gravitating towards, or had gone towards that, but it's even older. It's
Doom.
like Doom's one. Doom is a very, very big one.
Yeah.
The first Doom, yes, dude.
All that way back in 1993, one of the first ones. There was another one you thought of, Slow, or did you also gonna say Doom?
It's Quake.
Quake's huge. We're gonna get to Quake in the meantime, but Quake's absolutely huge as well with the 3D, with the first-person perspective and what it brought. But the whole ideal notion of having this first-person perspective, getting the 3D motion in, allowing the player to move around like this, get more of an idea of how they want to combat and stuff like that. ID Software was massive in this field. ID Software is a massive, massive name in gaming in terms of what they did in the beginning of their resume. Listen to this beginning. This is like what they developed, like the first ever games they developed. Commander Keen, which most of us probably don't know, but really important. Wolfenstein, 1992. Doom, 1993.
gosh.
Oh yeah.
Quake, 1996. All made by ID Software. All of those games were the first ones ever to have 3D renders. All of those games were some of the first ones to have that first-person perspective and its shooter combat. Might have been single-player, except now for Quake, which we'll get to, but it might have been single-player, but it was the first time all of that happened. And it was the first time Strafe was possible. Because we're going to go to Wolfenstein first, and this is what lit a fire, as I mentioned. The rendering of the 3D objects and graphics, and the first-person perspective. And that is where the first time strafing was actually ever mentioned in gaming. In the gaming manual of Wolfenstein 1992, if you were to open it up and go look to the control scheme, you had this little thing that described the button as strafe right and strafe left. We don't particularly know why they chose the word strafe, but what we do know is they actually described accurately what strafing at the time was just the dodging movement of your forward momentum and interrupting it by going sideways like this in order to avoid enemy fire and to like combat against the AI. It particularly at this point was holding down the Alt key, which we'll get back to in a little bit, but Doom would continue to strand forward using similar controls. But the real catalyst, the real one that absolutely made everything possible or just absolutely made it catch fire is Quake. And it's where we are going to start a lot of things, because Quake had a multiplayer perspective. And you can imagine this is the first time in multiplayer where a lot of these things came into play for the first time ever. You could do it against other players. You can figure out what's fooling other players, and you can figure out tactics and tips and tricks on how to get better or get an advantage over someone online. And this is kind of where, I guess you can say, what defined generations of MLG plays. This is what Quake set up for us in the beginning. But we'll get back to this in a bit, because we do need to talk about the different techniques that would spawn and conceptually be defined as a strafe. So if I'm saying to you a strafe, what type of techniques are the first ones that come to your mind if I say you're strafing?
Redirection. Like,
So redirection? Just dodging?
yeah.
Basically trying to get that
Yeah.
sideways movement, shifting around.
For me, I think it would definitely just be the left to right or forward to left or right movement, which just, increases your speed and momentum with a sudden change in direction, as he mentioned.
That's true. I think just getting an advantage, that would be the big thing. It has to have some sort of advantageous, I think, sort of nature towards it. We'll try and formally narrow them down. I'm not going to say this is everything that's strafing, and there's definitely probably more methods out there and of something that's slightly different, but we're going to try and formally narrow some of the techniques down and some of the known methods of that, and the background, whether we still see it today, does it actually still exist, is it been evolutionized or something like that. So first one up, circle strafing. That's quite a big one. This, as you can imagine, it's moving around continuously in a circle around your opponent, trying to evade the attack, whether it's a melee attack, whether it's someone just shooting at you, but you're constantly going around in a circle and trying to dodge the enemy's attack. This is prevalent, obviously, when you're fighting AI, because AI don't really think of the players going to go around in a circle around you. So that's also it. The primary component of this is the ability to kind of keep looking at your target. That's the only thing. If you're running around in a circle, but your camera is following you, that's going to be very disorienting. That wouldn't work. That would kind of nullify the circle strafe. And it's kind of what the concept hinges on. You need to have that separation of head movement and body movement. That wasn't really possible in the beginning for games. They always just said, oh, move the camera wherever they're going. Just, do this. Position the camera wherever they're going. There is one gaming franchise we have to thank for this, and it's an old friend. It's been mentioned a lot about this podcast. It's Legend of Zelda. Again, the original Legend of Zelda games didn't actually have this feature. You'd still move around and the camera would follow you, but people were kind of noting that there's an issue of this. I can't fight the guy properly because I need to keep looking at him or need to move my direction towards him to actually see the enemy. And the developers realized this. So they tried a new camera technique, which is the first time it's been ever used in Ocarina of Time, back in 1998. It was called Z-targeting. Now, Z-targeting, what it did was, it takes the nearest enemy, it tracks that enemy, and the camera would keep tracking that enemy regardless of the motion you were doing, indicating that you can run around the guy, but your focus is still on the guy. So you're going to know exactly when he attacks, what type of attack he's doing, when to dodge, when to evade, and it brings forward a lot of advantageous plays. And this really helped a lot. Not only, I think, in some shooters do it. We don't pick up on it as much because there's other types of strafing in shooters which is more dominant. Some shooters do it though, but it's also really major in the RPGs. Think of any RPG game you play. There's Dragon Age, Dark Souls, Elder Scrolls, Witcher. There's a lot of them that use Z-targeting with the circle strafing method being possible, where you can go around it. It's probably more prevalent in third-person games, because obviously then you can actually see your character running around them, but you can still see the enemy. So it's way more picked up on third-person games, but first-person games do it as well. And it's something that really changed the kind of landscape for RPG games. It allows it for different type of combat. It allowed different type of combat mechanics to become possible, and just as well different type of gameplay that we started. Next one, Strafe Running. I imagine the name of that one gives it away, but that's basically holding down two keys, the sideways one and the forward one, to get this kind of lateral movement and greater speed and a greater range of motion. So we don't see that too much in modern games because they've kind of picked up on that and said, no, we need a uniform speed for one direction, or whatever you're pressing, we're going to give you uniform speed. So we don't see it anymore in modern games. But this was a really, really kind of crucial, how would I put it, speedrunner tactic at some point. You strafe ran whenever you were speedrunning in the 90s. If you didn't strafe run, you were not going to beat records, because that's the tactic everyone was doing. And it used to be also kind of the thing that defined a lot of games. If you think about GoldenEye 007, that's a stealth game and a combat game. 90s, great game. It used a lot of strafe running. There was another one which name is now slipped me, but it's also great on the I think it's Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark, that's the name of it. Also uses strafe running a lot. Also gets the whole advantage of gaining a greater maximum speed. But another innovative game that did it was called Pathways into Darkness, which coincidentally, the first fully 3D game ever. So when I say fully 3D game, yes, Wolfenstein and Doom and all that had revolutionary 3D rendering, but they didn't render everything in 3D. There were still 2D elements, especially environment, still 2D elements and stuff like that, because at that time the machines couldn't run it. This was, however, the first 3D game ever, fully 3D. And who do you think developed Pathways into Darkness? I'm just throwing it out there. I'm gonna ask you guys just to guess, but think about game developers. Who developed Pathways into Darkness? 1993, 1994?
Honestly, I wasn't around it.
Well, if you weren't around at the time, it's who's dead? Who's a dead developer? They're not really dead, but I'm just saying, like, dead developers tend to be in the 90s a lot. Any guess?
Dude, I don't know.
It was
Lost.
Bungie. Bungie Games was the developer of Pathways into Darkness. Now, Bungie Games, kind of, it makes sense when you think about it. They have a pretty intertwined story when it comes to strafing. Look at what their track record is and what they've developed. The first 3 Halo games are all Bungie. Destiny 1, Destiny 2, Bungie. Think about the movement and the combat in that game. There's a lot of strafing. It might be aerial, and it might be way more of the kind of jumping and lateral kind of strafing, but it's littered with it. It's absolutely littered with it. But they made Pathways into Darkness, and it was the first game that ever allowed strafe running, which is where we took our baby steps before we took full flight into the air and started strafing up there. So there I have a really intertwined story along with ID Software when it comes to this whole mechanic. And speaking of that, they also do have some like tweaks and strafing mechanics that are class-based and stuff like that, but we'll get back to that. But speaking of this whole lateral motion and going upwards, we did not get to that stage without Quake. And that's why I want to stress how important Quake was, especially from a multiplayer perspective, to this whole strafing thing. They took it to another level. When I say strafe jumping, it's an umbrella term we use, but that just means any lateral strafing that involves going into the air or lateral strafing while you are in the air. There's a lot of variations though, and we're gonna put it into. The reason this exists is because of a bug in code. Like all great things, usually a bug in code causes some fantastic stuff to happen. Quake had a bug in code. They said, right, we're gonna give a maximum speed in one direction while you're traveling, and you're not gonna be able to exceed that maximum speed. So people said, okay, I'm gonna be running and I'm gonna jump. And the thing is, yes, there's a maximum speed on running, and yes, there's a maximum speed on jumping, but if you're running and jumping, the maximum speed combines. Quake kind of forgot about that, and they didn't factor that into their code. So, there was an exploit that if you were to be jumping while you were running, you can get a greater maximum speed, and it would absolutely fool the AI, it could fool players online who didn't know about the mechanic, it could be a huge advantage immediately off the bat. So we're going to talk about the variations that Quake, all of these that I'm mentioning now, Quake made first. We've got the circle jump, which, as it suggests, laterally moving in a circular motion while you are in the air, or if I want to put it in really simple terms, it's the 360 no-scope, OMG! That's where it ended up. The 360 no-scope ended up in Quake. We got bunny hopping, which I'm sure the 2 more competitive players will tell me all about. Whoa, this bunny hopping thing that we all do in CSGO or Apex Legends or all those beautiful games. It's everywhere. And all the people are bunny hopping.
You terrible bastard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't say everything they made was good. I just said it was revolutionary. But bunny hopping is a really... Obviously, we all know bunny hopping. It's just like the constant motion of going up and down and jumping in different directions to try and throw off whoever you're firing at. And it's just... The thing is that stamina never was factored into that, and you can just hop back and forth, kind of like those old Daffy Duck cartoons whenever he was getting shot at, like, whoo-hoo-hoo! It just goes everywhere. But everyone gravitates towards bunny hopping in competitive gaming, and its roots lie in Quake, which is massive. Kind of a rare one, rocket jump. We don't see that anymore, really, but the rocket jump was also in Quake. It was pretty big back then. What it does, basically, you shoot the RPG or rocket at your feet, and at that exact moment, once it like comes out of that projectile, you jump. And it will give you kind of a super jump of sorts. You'll lose some health, but the leaping gives you some sort of super jump, and it can give a massive advantage, obviously, over your opponents, because they don't expect you to go that high, and you have a much more kind of leverage over them, so I put it that way. So we don't see it as much these days because obviously realistically shooting an RPG at your feet is fatal. So I don't think games are incorporating that as much anymore. But there is a cool little story also involving some of this ridiculous stuff. It's actually from Halo, so thank you Bungie again for this wonderful thing. It's called an Icicle Jump. Do anyone know what an Icicle Jump is? Nobody.
Doesn't ring a bell to me.
Nobody watched 2005 MLG plays or 2000 and whatever. When did Halo 3 come out? Some a long time ago.
Dude, I was 1 year old in 2005.
I was 5 years old.
So, the Icicle Jump, one of the most beautiful strafing mechanics I've ever heard about. The Icicle Jump involves some maps in Halo. Had the natural hello. Who's joining the podcast late? Hello?
It was just better.
Okay then. We're talking about strafing. Get with the flow. I'm going to continue. Right. So in Halo, there was an Icicle Jump. And also, Dylan, do you know an Icicle Jump or not? Yes, no?
Nope.
Okay, cool. You're going to listen to the
Put the
story.
new guy on the spot.
Put the new guy on the spot. He deserves it. Right. The Icicle Jump. Some maps in Halo had these natural forming icicles across certain ledges. And in Halo, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the motion of Halo. It's really floaty. It's kind of, I think you have jetpacks and stuff, and you kind of have this kind of futuristic movement where you're quite high in the air. There's a tactic in Halo where you were able to shoot off the icicles with your weapon. Most likely snipers, because you want to be accurate when you're doing this. But most times the snipers would do it, and if you shoot the icicle, it's falling down, but it's a solid object. So what they did was they'd shoot the icicle down, they'd jump, they'd hit the icicle, use it as a platform and jump, and then land behind their opponent and then snipe them in the head. That was the Icicle Jump. It was super, super, super popular, and you were a super, super, super cool guy if you could pull it off. More of the times you didn't, but it's just beautiful to think about. Like, they somehow coded that into gaming. They said, we're going to make it possible. You're going to be able to jump on a falling icicle, and you're going to snipe the guy in the head right behind them. Beautiful, beautiful for people in gaming to be able to do that. But all three of these...
Sounds like a very sweaty move.
It's a very sweaty move, I'm not going to lie. And you can imagine being killed by that. Your reaction, I don't think is going to be a very positive one. You're going to be very...
Yeah.
But yeah, all three
Just
of
keep
these...
it, bro.
Keep it? Hello?
Just keep it. If you like you're complaining about like that, whatever, just like say get good.
Yeah. No, just get good, bro. Just, go do some YouTube.
Just don't be bad.
Yeah, exactly. So easy, alright? So easy. Just turn good on. Just turn good plays on, in the settings. It's a toggle. But, yeah. All three of these type of strafe jumps have become very ingrained and almost standard in today's gameplay. Maybe not the rocket jump, but maybe it should make a comeback. That'll be nice. They all came from Quake, and you can imagine the scene. It's 1996. I want to stress this. It's 1996. None of these three mechanics have ever been in a game ever before. This is one of the first online multiplayer games ever made, and you've put 3 new strafing mechanics in it all at once. Can you imagine people losing their minds doing plays like these for the very, very first time? This is like, I think, a moment almost in history that has to be described. Like, this is, like, no one was doing this, and yet here it is all at once. And it's widely regarded that this, along with the excellent gameplay that Quake did do, Quake became one of the very first esports games. And it's allowed it because of this competitive nature that it kind of sowed or ingrained in us, and the ability to do fantastic plays like this, that the competitive gaming scene really took off. And look where the competitive gaming scene is now. It's up there. Like, it's probably one of the most profitable things out there currently now. But yeah, let's just take a brief little tour from this as well, and we'll look back at the techniques again, because I do want to stress this. This is what I've been referring to mostly, is if you're in the context of playing a human operator or a playable character and stuff on the ground. But if strafing isn't limited to humans, I think this is a question more for Mr. Juan de Dealer. If I say strafing isn't limited to humans, Juan de Dealer is a guy that plays a lot of War Thunder, World of Warships, Battlefield. He knows about vehicle combat. He knows about the online communities of vehicle combat. If I were to say, thinking back about all these strafing tactics I mentioned, is there some components of it that you do see in this kind of air combat when you're playing online? Do people like strafe in a helicopter?
Helicopters, yes, but not so much in a combat sense.
So just kind of to be tricky.
It's just basically people who try and be fancy. But the problem is with aerial combat, like there are obviously some very unrealistic games that I can't think of like right now, straight off the top of my head. But like take War Thunder in particular, right?
Yeah.
You don't really strafe with the helicopters simply because the strafing is too slow. They can fly sideways, yes, but it's not really a combat tactic. It's more for your tight maneuvers. But then again, if you look at like the context of Destiny, right? So your sparrows can strafe to avoid things.
And that's what we talked about, the class-based thing again with Bungie.
Yeah. I mean, once again, Bungie being out here. Bungie,
Bungo. But yeah, no, vehicle combat was kind of there, like strafing. I get it though from his perspective. It's a way heavier thing to operate, so you don't really see the strafe, because I don't imagine someone in a World of Tanks is doing this like, whoa, that's an amazing strafe move. Now I can shoot my opponent. That's like, right, oh, I'm dead. So
yeah, pretty much how it goes.
It's just more the arcadey games. I have seen it as well, like with all of that. But yeah, now looking back on this again, we do have the strafing techniques. We had the games being developed now, especially after Quake, that's becoming more and more ingrained in these strafing techniques. And they're saying, yeah, make it like possible for people to do all the strafing. Now, what about the controls? Because back then, I'm sure some of you have known, shocker, WASD keys were not standard in the 90s. WASD keys was not used standardly in the 90s at all. It was an option. You could pick it if you want, but a lot of people didn't even pick it, and it wasn't the default. It was the directional keys on the keyboard. Now, if you were to look down on your directional keys on the keyboard, and you think about that now, I don't imagine a lot of you are going to be enjoying playing CSGO, Apex, whatever you want on those things right there.
No.
But
it's not fun.
Yeah. There is a reason behind why all of this is, and that's kind of the mouse, which wasn't used in gaming back then. It was barely used because the camera of the game, again, as we saw it before Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda, again, Dylan, you kind of missed it, but yeah, Ocarina of Time did something very nice for all of us. So thank you again, Legend of Zelda. But the camera techniques, where if you moved, you're kind of swiveling and the camera's following you, that was still a thing. So the mouse was useless. People were barely using the mouse. Maybe if you want to click on some dialogue or whatever, but they weren't using the mouse. What did happen, though, was that kind of these games, I mentioned the Alt key. Remember the Alt key in Wolfenstein? I said that's the game manual for strafing left and right. Now you can imagine you have to hold down Alt key. You have to press your direction buttons left or right, as well as forward, to do kind of a strafing maneuver. This took a lot of skill and a lot of muscle memory. And I think the thing that we have to remember, it's the 90s. There's no YouTube. Internet forums were really in its infancy back then. So you either learned these things by yourself, figured it out, you either invited a friend over who knew how to do it, or you took a book out of the library that probably said Quake tips and tricks, or some published book with Quake like cheating mechanics. I swear the 90s are some of the funniest times, because it's like right between there. It was like technology's taking over, but we're still stuck in the Stone Age. It's such a funny time to look back on gaming, to know all of this. Like, you're completely helpless for help in the game, but games exist. So it's just a perfect blend, a perfect storm. But something did happen in 1998 that was a great enabler for strafing and in general gameplay. It pioneered a lot of it. It was the first time ever that WASD keys were default. I don't know if it's default, but WASD keys were definitely favored in this context. The first time ever. And that the mouse was used to look around with the camera. Not the like actual keyboard or not the thing you're following. What game do you think that does very simple but very effective trick in 1998? Use the mouse and use the WASD keys for the first time ever in gaming. There's a big game that came out in 1998. 1999 also technically, but I think it's 198.
Is it Doom?
Doom's older, so it's not Doom. It's the people who made Counter-Strike, if that helps.
Oh, Half-Life.
Half-Life. First game ever to use the WASD keys and the mouse as a combo. And it's kind of overlooked, but that's huge. That's huge. Do you know of any other game that doesn't do this? That's really huge. But yeah, this change made a lot of sense. And other games in the future would follow suit as the core way of kind of how moving around worked and how looking around would be. And this doesn't only make strafing easier, that means anybody could strafe. So I think that's kind of what puts them in the spotlight. Oh, done left, I don't know. She probably just said hello. But that's what kind of put them in the spotlight for what was to come with the whole strafing thing. I think just a small note, it's something really obvious, but probably I should mention it. Consoles obviously very easy. One stick for moving, one stick for looking around. So I promise you, strafing was also in consoles. Don't think it's a PC only thing. But yeah, just look at the ripples it made. Thinking about like that small change in 1998, and it's what 24 years. It's 24 years since Half-Life released. People were born after Half-Life. Damn it, 2 of you. I think all of us actually were born after Half-Life. What? I just realized.
Gents, I'll come back in a moment.
No worries. But yeah, speaking of multiplayer then, because this is where it really set fire. And looking back at it again, all the types of strafing. There is some new ones that I have zero clue about how it works and how it's used, and I couldn't actually, well, I could probably go in Wikipedia, but I had 2 very expert people here, so I might as well ask them. The new type of strafing stuff, I think Mr. Menashe mentioned in Apex, there's some weird thing called Tap Strafing, which I don't know what on dear earth that is.
Oh, yeah.
There's also apparently Shoot Strafing, and I don't know what on dear earth that is. Or Counter Strafing.
Shoot Strafing?
Was it Shoot Strafing? I might have gotten my words wrong.
I think the second was Counter-Strafing.
Counter-Strafing. Yeah. So mind if either of you can just tell me what on dear earth that monster abomination thing, sounding thing is?
I can start with Counter-Strafing because it's the simpler of the 2. So with Counter-Strafing, the idea is to basically, you have your WASD keys, your WASD, and in most shooters, you have maximum accuracy when you're standing still. And if you're moving, the accuracy of your shots decreases. So what people figure they could do is they could move in one direction. So let's say they press the A key to move towards the left. And at the moment they tap the D key. Wow, I still have to look at that. At the moment they tap the D key while holding in the A key, the game will take it as the character moving left. And then as soon as they tap the D key, the character is supposed to move right. Because it's still moving left, the D key actually cancels out the left movement. So the character stands still while you're holding the D key and the A key at the same time. So what people started doing is they started holding in the A key to move left and then tapping the D key for 1 or 2 seconds at a time to stand still. And then that's when they'd get the maximum shooting accuracy. So the advantage to this was if I'm moving left and you're shooting me, it's harder for you to hit me because, well, I'm a moving target as opposed to standing still. But while I'm moving left and you can't hit me, I'll tap D so I can stand still and obstruct your aiming even more. And at that moment, I'm standing still. I've got maximum accuracy. So I can shoot you perfectly because you're probably standing still to hit a moving target, which, I was moving technically until I tapped D. So it's actually a very interesting mechanic used in the mostly Counter-Strike and Valorant and, the first-person shooter scenes, because it helps decrease your hitability, to say, while increasing your chances of, getting the other opponent while obscuring the aim. So that's the counter-strafing movement.
So
the tap strafing, yeah.
You said Icicle Jump was sweaty, and you just described that, and you said Icicle Jump is sweaty.
You see, well, counter-strafing, it's not difficult. It's more like, you're holding A and you tap D, or you're holding D and you tap A, just to stand still for a moment.
Okay, now do that on a console.
It is obviously, you can't do that on a console at all. It's obviously more used in the higher levels of an FPS game, which is why, the lower level players will be like, oh, he's hacking, he's running while shooting, because it technically looks like you're still running when you're shooting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very interesting mechanic.
Cool. Slowly, do you want to take a crack at what tap strafing is? I'm imagining you know what tap strafing is because I heard it's in Apex.
Yeah. Alright, so to describe strafing is very confusing topic, and people don't know how to describe. They don't know how to describe it in I don't know. They don't know how to explain it yet. It's all kind of. So basically, what it is pretty much redirecting your move. So because there's a character Octane that has a jump, allows you to go into one direction. Basically, with tap strafing, as you take that and go into that direction, you're able to do a 180 or a 360 turn and go the other direction. I don't know. It's like a weird kind of mechanic to explain and kind of talk about or whatever. It's still and what, but there are a ton of people that do complain about it and oh dude, this mechanic is really broken. You need to remove it. And it's dude, it's kind of a movement technique that only pro players can do. You can bind scroll wheel to pull you and tap strafe more smoothly, I guess. You can't really do it on controller though, because I mean you can on Steam you can change the whole
binding
layouts and what but so you can't do that. The FPS cap being 60 and you get 140. It's a lot more smooth PC than the console, but it's still a I don't know. It's still something that is still being explored and thing like that. It's still freshly new,
So what kind of sick things are you PC people coming up with to even make our lives that much worse, huh?
Tap strafing is a bit different on PC. Well, from what I hear describing.
So
it's really it is.
Yeah.
But
on PC, it's more of the mechanic on PC. It's more like you're moving forward. You're just moving forward at a really, let's say, sprint speed in the game. So you don't even need a character speed boost like Octane or something. You can just be, moving really fast forward. And then the idea is that you jump. But as you jump, people realize that every time you jump and press forward, you reach the maximum speed in the game, and you can change your direction. So you're moving forward, you jump up, and then you hit jump and forward again. But at the instant you do that, you press the direction key and sort of curve your mouse around like this. So that's how the 180 is actually created, just by that forced forward upwards movement while you're jumping, and then the sudden turn in the mouse. So that's how we do it on keyboard and mouse, and that's why console players hate us completely.
Half-Life is supposed to make our lives easier to strafe. Why are you doing this? But speaking about that, I might be a little bit outdated with my information, but I did hear tap strafing is apparently being banned, or is banned. I don't know.
Yeah, it's banned in the pro leagues and money conditions and everything.
Yeah,
because that's an interesting thing. Obviously, the only enabler of why tap strafing currently is being banned is because there's crossplay. And that brings up an interesting point in terms of strafing, because obviously we do know when it comes to the competitive shooting scene, the PC has way more kind of speed on its input. The input output on the PC is just it's faster. We can't argue that. It is faster than a controller. And that allows different strafing mechanics such as tap strafing, possibly also counter strafing, but I think tap strafing, counter strafing mostly is the ones that like PC are using as an advantage over consoles. And obviously it's being banned, but that's only because crossplay is being like enabled. And it brings up another interesting point is like banning these kind of advantageous kind of moves. Like we can even take a very basic one. Aiming in PC. Generally much easier. But then I say, okay, you know what, just give the console people auto aim. Fair compensation, right? Now, discussing that, when we talk about fair compensation or punishment when it comes to crossplay, do you feel, I don't know, like you guys might be biased because you're both PC, but do you feel it's fair to say, no, you can't tap strafe in Apex, even if you have a PC and you're able to do it? No? There's console people that can't do it.
Okay. For me, like when it comes to money and things like that, I feel like it should be like a fair like play style. But if it's like a ranked like thing, I feel like you can do what you want because you're not competing for money. You're not competing for like a title, but you're just competing for a rank. You're playing rank, and ranks nowadays just don't mean anything at all. But if it comes to money and whatnot, then I feel like it should be like played at like an equal kind of level. But then another topic comes up is, console or controller players coming over to PC. What do we do about aim assist? It's like, bro, we have physics. If it's that overpowered, why don't you move over to fucking controller instead of spending like 2 years on the keyboard? But it's like I don't know. It's kind of like a weird topic.
It is a weird topic, but it's worth discussing. So
yeah, in my view, I feel like I agree with what he said to an extent, in that, you know, in ranked it's fine and all that stuff. But the only reason it's being taken out of proper competitive play for big tournaments is because of the amount of backlash from, you know, controller players.
Exactly.
But if you look at the majority of players in tournaments, I would say it's maybe like a 70-30 or 80-20 split, with the larger amount being keyboard and mouse players. So in my view, I don't think that it should be banned, simply for the first fact that it's not technically an exploit in the game. By this, I don't mean that it's something... Wait, let me word this better. It's not something the game devs have looked at and said, let's take this out the game because it breaks the game. Or, you know, give someone an extremely unfair advantage. Because if you look within the PC base itself, the realistic truth is that majority of players can't tap strafe. They simply don't know how to do that mechanic. So now within the PC lobby itself, you have, again, let's say an 80-20 split amongst the 20 being, you know, sweaty players and stuff like that who can tap strafe. And then the other 80 being, you know, regular Andes who just get on and play after work and stuff like that. So if those PC players can still win more games than, you know, the sweaty pro players on an average basis, then I don't think it should be banned cross-platform.
It's up to discretion, because I think the big thing is just it's the fact that it's crossplay. I think that's the fact that like people, I don't know why there's an assumption that it's going to be a fair playing field if you're playing crossplay. Like I don't know why people come up with that assumption. And I think it's probably also why a lot of games, bigger games, have probably not even tested the waters of crossplay. Like one I can obviously think of, Rainbow Six, or probably, I don't know if they ever make crossplay in Rainbow Six, because I can just imagine. I can just put it in my head. Can you imagine what the console people are gonna do on Rainbow Six when they have to play against PC people? Like, oh my gosh, the game's gonna be cancelled. Like the game itself is just gonna be cancelled.
But I mean, like console players like using a Cronus like console like that, but like playing the actual with like PC players, dude. I'm good. I'm good, man.
Yeah, but that's kind of just the gist of it. Maybe they should just make it like if you tap the touchpad on consoles, we can tap strafe too. Then everyone wins, right? Just have a button, just have a button to tap strafe, and it'll be very easy. But that's mostly the story of strafing. We're still in the evolution of it. We're still in the revolution of it. There's a lot of a lot of trends and stuff that like just fire up. Like these two I didn't even know about. As well as like what's come before, and it's probably going to continue onwards long into competitive gaming that we'll keep seeing these. There are some nice special mentions I do want to say. The Icicle Jump was one of my favorites, as I mentioned, but it's also some cool components of it. We talked about Destiny. It's making strafing possible more for different classes, such as hunters, because they're more nimble, they're more agile classes, and they have specific weapons that also allow strafing. There's like a knife. I think you can shift with the knife, like you can have like this whole glitch effect of the knife where like you move forward very quickly or something like that, but it has this whole strafing thing towards it. Games like Deathloop, pretty recent, that's actually a pickup. If you kill the right person, you get a strafe power pickup, like a power-up type of thing, which is kind of cool. It does allow for way more kind of nimble, agile gameplay if you're into that sort of play style. Call of Duty even had some pretty interesting ones. The more annoying one is probably one I didn't even mention, the one where people keep bobbing up and down their heads while they're crouching and like and they're shooting you like this. That's probably one of the more annoying strafes as well, but it's still happening in 2022. But also particularly when they started going towards their more futuristic games, like let's even talk about one of the more basic ones, Advanced Warfare, had allowed strafing with like exo abilities. There was literally an exo dodge where like you can just shift very quickly left and right or forward and back. Even in the air you can like do this dodging thing. But for example, if someone had an EMP or if there's some sort of score streak, it disables all your exo abilities, including the strafing. So it's kind of an interesting way how it's disabling your strafing mechanic based on kind of what is available to you currently, or your loadout or your class or whatever. And that's just something interesting. Any other interesting like stories about strafing that you guys have picked up, like maybe in a specific game, maybe in a specific like genre, like, oh, this is happening in, I don't know, platformers?
Yeah. No, I think for me, strafing is mostly in the Apex and CSGO scene. My favorite strafing is probably in Apex, where you have Pathfinder, and you can sort of like imagine a ledge that's like directly in front of you. Pathfinder has a grapple ability. So with that grapple, you can sort of look up at the ledge in front of you, grapple onto it. But as you're, being pulled upwards by the grapple, you do like a 180 turnaround. And that sort of lets you go faster in the grapple, and you can sort of like make a 360 movement up, which is very nice for like obscuring other players' aim. So for me, that would probably be my favorite, type of strafing in the games.
Yeah, for me, there's a character called Horizon. I think she's a good character for movement because it allows full fatigue or full animate or fatigue, and like that's really useful. Like you drop down a ship or you skydive to your location. You could just like hit a ledge and you won't get any of the fatigue while you land down. With other characters you will, where you like permanently stuck around for a few seconds. That's really cool. Like ability that I actually like. It's pretty cool.
I think Apex is a really fun like playtest for a lot of strafing currently. It's probably one of the leading ones currently, especially with its competitive scene, which is quite good.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because obviously the more games I play are way more kind of grounded. So I don't see a lot of... Hello, Sean. I don't see a lot of strafing, like, because the thing is, the people I'm playing are a lot more meaty, a lot more heavy movement. They're way more like kind of human, like it's not really futuristic. But there was one particularly funny strafing. It is just a circle jump really, but it was really funny how it's been made possible by specifically picking that character. Sean, you might actually know this one. Do you have you ever seen those plays by Bikini Body who uses Clash or not?
Not that I know of. I don't recall something like that.
Just a quick top down. Clash is a shield operator on defense. Big Shield is a primary ability with electricity. When she's not having a shield, she has a secondary weapon, and the shield goes on her back. Important to remember, the shield goes on her back. So.
Oh yes. And then she like goes across the doorway backwards, but not really.
He does a 360. But because the shield's on your back, when people are firing at you, it deflects off the shield. But then by the time you're facing them, their mag's empty and just boop. Was one of the
I've seen those.
big plays, but that's.
I've also seen it being tried by certain people, Dylan, and it doesn't work.
You have to time that so perfect because you have to your turn has to initiate just as they start shooting at you because you need to get this shield in front of you. It does also help Clash in a certain way because you can't accidentally friendly fire because you're shooting a shield on the back. Mostly. Does still happen, unfortunately. But just another cool thing on the competitive scene. You kind of see these slight little stuff creep through. But I think, as I said, playtest-wise, I think your kind of very agile movement centric games, Apex Legends, Destiny, probably the new Halo Infinite. I haven't seen much about Halo Infinite recently. Assassin's Creed even, but Assassin's Creed's also a completely different motion with all its melee combat and stuff. But you do see it in Assassin's Creed. They're gonna.
I feel like you mostly see it in Unity.
You do see a lot because Assassin's Creed also uses that Z targeting we were talking about following the enemy like this, and it's interesting because it's the camera is slightly further back. I can be mistaken, but I feel like Assassin's Creed's camera is slightly further back than any other third person, so it does deliver interesting kind of perspective on that. But these new games with a lot of movement specific stuff, also parkour games, Dying Light 2, Dying Light 1, very parkour centric games. Also kind of allows strafing as kind of allowing in your abilities, but they are going to drive forward what we know, but we'll probably mostly see this stuff on the competitive scene where it's used for an advantage. That's just the reality, but we'll be seeing a lot more of it. Lastly, let's look forward, let's look back, let's look everywhere we want to. Any strafing mechanics that we want to make us come back? Rocket jump. Is there any strafing mechanics you saw in an old game it would be nice to see that in a modern game?
No.
I don't think there's much really that we don't see as much anymore. The rocket jump's one big example that I can't think of, but other than that, we don't see anything that's not there anymore. If I can put it that way.
Yeah.
No.
I think especially as you mentioned, because the WASD keys have become standardized, for movement, with space being jump and then a mouse to look around. I think strafing is you can do pretty much anything you could back then, and now even more,
Yeah, that's true.
They are the buggy ones that have sort of left us.
Unfortunately.
The buggy bungo ones.
How about a shooter that doesn't have strafing at all? Would you try that out online? No strafing whatsoever. You can just look forward.
Nope.
If you turn, the camera is following you. You can't dodge. You can only walk.
No, I wouldn't do it.
How about actually I've got a better idea. Take the Apex Legends guys, right? Have them go into a collab with Quake, which means they have to use the control scheme with Quake using the directional keys and Alt to strafe. No mouse.
I think it would be more fluid than Apex. I feel like
if they can figure
that's actually a very fair statement, Slow. It genuinely could be really more fluid.
I think the muscle memory is the big thing because I'm looking at my gun keyboard as well. Alt and directional buttons is a lot of practice, and you have to jump with space as well. So that's your fingers are very cluttered.
But I think the reason why it would be fluid is because the FPS console you stuck at 60, right, and way over. So I feel like it would be way more fluid and way more smoother to hit those small kicks or whatever. I just think that Quake would have way more better effects, in my opinion.
So Quake Remastered 2022, make it happen, people. But yeah,
that would be nice.
I'll leave you with those thoughts. I think that's all from me, from Menashe, from Juan, from Slow. I think we've all said our piece about strafing, about how it's here and it's probably here to stay. So yeah, it's been a fun time to learn a lot and to discuss a lot. And yeah, that concludes another episode of Video Game Anatomies. I hope you guys learned what you needed to learn. I hope you guys are going to make many more MLG plays and we'll be showing off that content either on YouTube or WhatsApp or whatever you guys record on. Potato or whatever it might be. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. And yeah, till the next one.
Bye, guys.